The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 5. Dragon and Judge. Chapter 8. Droopa Jack! Behind his closed eyelids, Jack frowned. What in the world? Droopa Jack! The call came again. With an effort, Jack pried open one eyelid. There was a faint glow coming from the other room, but nothing any reasonable person would consider actual daylight. I'm here, he called back. What is it? It is sunrise, Droopa Jack, the Golden said. Time to awaken and prepare for your duties. Jack frowned. What, already? Most others are already awake and refreshed and going about their own duties, the voice replied reprovingly. Terrific, Jack muttered under his breath. All right, I'll be right there. I will wait outside to escort you to the great assembly hall, the other said, and Jack heard the subtle rustling of the fringe as the visitor exited. The great hall, Dracos murmured from Jack's shoulder. The one said they'd be setting up a judgment chair for me next to his seat of decision, Jack told him. Blast. The way Alfonsi was talking yesterday, I was hoping they'd take a few days first to translate all those case files into English. Or broad speak, as I believe they called it, Dracos said. Whatever, Jack said. Maybe give us a chance to check out the mining area up there. I guess we're kicking off the schedule today. I hope they're not expecting me to read that chicken scratching of theirs. I'm sure they've considered that. Maybe. Steeling himself, Jack threw off the covers and landed his feet on the floor. The stone was every bit as cold as he'd expected it to be. Either way, I sure don't remember anything in the SNA's encyclopedias about Judge Paladin starting work before the birds are even up. Perhaps it's a local custom, Draco said, peeling himself off Jack's back and leaping onto the floor. He stretched, cat style, a quick shiver running through his scales. I hope the clothing they gave you is warmer than it looks. I imagine the canyon will warm up once the sun is actually up, Jack said, heading for the bathroom. I just hope the shower comes equipped with hot water. Is that likely? It's possible, Jack said. A lot of spaceship galleys and bathrooms are designed to be mostly self-contained. Stop! Draco said, suddenly, his ears stiffening. Jack froze in mid-step, holding his breath. He didn't hear anything. What is it? He whispered back. Slowly, the Kada's ears went back to their usual angle. I thought I heard a noise, he said. Like someone scratching at the stone. Jack looked toward the door. No one was visible. Hello? He called. Is someone there? There was no answer. I don't think it came from outside, Dracos murmured. There was a faint echo to it. Jack's skin tingled as he looked over at one of the white stones in the between walls enclave. One of the shafts? He asked. Possibly, Draco said. At any rate, it stopped now. Jack took a deep breath. Well, keep an ear out, he warned. He started again for the shower. By the way, did I tell you I think I figured out what sides and uprights are? The sides are most likely the political or social groupings, which tend to face off on issues concerning the administration of the canyon, Draco said. The uprights are possibly those Golvins who have generally proven honest and trustworthy in their testimonies in the past. Jack made a face. I don't know sometimes why I even bother to talk to you, he growled. Go eat your breakfast mouse meat. I'll be out in a minute. The shower turned out to be gratifyingly hot. The soap the Golvins had provided didn't seem very effective, but the towel was thick and strangely spongy. Jack washed up, threw on his shirt and jeans, and had a quick breakfast. And now that he was thinking about it, the meat did taste much more like fish than rodent. After breakfast, he went back into the bedroom, took off his other clothes, and dressed in the robe, sash, duster, and boots of his new office. Despite the Golvin's concerns, the clothes seemed to fit reasonably well. The boots were a shade too big, but not enough to be a problem. "How do I look?" he asked, holding his arms out to his sides. "Very noble," Draco said. Jack looked sharply at him, but if there had been any sarcasm in the comment, it wasn't visible in the Kadah's face or posture. In fact, the odd thought crossed Jack's mind that it was just the opposite. It was almost as if Dracos was seeing him for the first time. Jack looked down his front at the strange clothing, a flurry of not entirely pleasant emotions chasing across his mind. Maybe he was seeing himself for the first time, too. Or maybe not. "Kind of hard to move, though," he commented, swinging his arms experimentally from the shoulders. He could play all the dress-up he wanted, he reminded himself firmly, but underneath it all, he was still only Jack Morgan, 14-year-old former thief. "You look fine," Dracos assured him. "Shall I get your hat?" "I'll do it." Crossing to the nightstand, Jack picked up the hat and set it carefully on his head. Took a deep breath, again forcing back the swirl of emotions, and held his hand out to Dracos. "Okay," he said. "Let's you and me go dispense some justice." Two male Golvins and a female were waiting at the ground as he emerged from the apartment and made his way down the bridge. "Good morning to you, Jupa Jack," the female said gravely, touching the fingertips of both hands to her forehead, the gesture briefly covering her eyes. "I am 3165 among many. I will be your assistant and reader of records." "I'll be pleased to have your service, Thonsifi," Jack said. Briefly, he wondered if he should repeat her gesture, and decided against it. "I am honored to be of such service." Thonsifi waved a hand toward the great hall. "Your seat of judgment is prepared. Shall we go?" She headed off along the narrow path that led to the great hall. One of the males walked behind her, with Jack and the other male bringing up the rear. Many of the canyon's residents were already hard at work, Jack saw. Most were tending the cropland, while others arranged cloth and leather and metal goods on small tables around the bases of some of the pillars. From somewhere in the distance came the rhythmical clank of metal on metal. About 30 Golvins were waiting inside the north end of the great hall. As promised, a chair had been set up for Jack in front of and to the right of the One's own seat of decision. "Juba Jack!" The One greeted him gravely from his chair as Jack stepped in front of him. "You are ready to begin?" "I am," Jack said, eyeing the chair with fresh trepidation as he walked over to it. What in the world did he know about judging other people? For that matter, what gave him the right to even try? But he was here, and there was nothing for it but to do his best. Bracing himself, he gathered the skirts of his robe and duster around him and sat down. Thonsifi stepped to the right side of the chair. "The first dispute lies between 377 and 690, she said. "It is a question of irrigation and water rights." The two older Golvins stepped forward out of the group, one of them glowering, the other practically radiating pride and self-righteousness. "Describe the situation," Jack said, studying them. "The wall of the irrigation canal that separates their croplands has become chipped on Theseus' side," Thonsifi explained. "Some of the water that might otherwise go to Sinina's land is thus going instead to Theseus' land." Jack frowned. This was a legal problem? "Why can't the chipped area simply be fixed?" he asked. "It can," Thesifi said. "But as I said, it is on Theseus' side." "And?" "It is on Theseus' side," Thonsifi repeated, starting to sound a little flustered. Jack nodded as he finally got it. A Galvan whose name started with 3 clearly outranked a simple 6, which probably meant no one would come onto his property to fix the channel wall without his permission. And since he was getting more than his fair share of water as a result, he had no reason to fix the channel himself. "What about the people downstream?" he asked.
"They are all lesser numbers,"
Sifi said. Which meant that although they were probably getting cheated as well, none of them had the rank to go fix the canal either. "And this damage occurred when?"
6 seasons ago,"
Sifi said. Jack blinked at her. 6 seasons? He echoed, turning to look up at the one. The one held his gaze steadily.
"I rendered a decision," he said. "This thesis appealed to the higher authority of the Jupa."
"And the last time a Jupa was here?"
"The last were Jupa Stewart and Jupa Ariel," the one said.
Jack grimaced. 11 years with no Judge Paladins in sight. No wonder Theseus had felt safe appealing his case. Well, at least the game was over now. He'd simply ordered Theseus to let Senina come over and fix the channel, and that would be the end of it. But even as he opened his mouth to say so, he took another look at Theseus' expression. Radiating pride. And suddenly he saw the trap he'd nearly walked into. These people had built their whole society on status and position, and on who could do what with whom. Throw in their dependence on their limited crop area, and there was the potential here for long-term trouble. If he casually brushed their cultural legs out from under them, it would leave scars and resentment that would linger long after he was gone. Still, even in places where status was king, greed was always queen. And if there was one thing Uncle Virgil had taught him, it was how to deal with both of those. "Very well," he said, turning back to the complainants. "It's clear that through the extra water obtained for his crops, Theseus has been taking unfair profit from his neighbors."
"Yet I did not cause the rupture,"
Theseus put in stiffly. "I understand that," Jack agreed. "Nevertheless, you did profit from it. I therefore decree that until the channel wall has been returned to its proper condition, 20% of your crops will be forfeit to be divided between Senina and the—"
"What?"
Theseus all but screeched. He started forward, stopping only when one of the 2 silent males who had accompanied Jack stepped into his path.
"This is outrageous!"
"To be divided between Senina and the other landowners downstream," Jack continued. He gestured to his right. "The choosing and distribution of that 20% will be handled by my assistant, Sifi." Out of the corner of his eye, Jack saw Sifi stiffen with surprise. Apparently, she wasn't looking forward to invading Theseus' territory any more than Senina was. But most of Jack's attention was on Theseus, and the resulting show was well worth it. The older Galvan's eyes widened. His skin wrinkled violently at this casual piling of insult onto injury. For a 3 to have a lowly 31 onto his land for the purpose of confiscating some of his crops?
"The channel will be fixed,"
he ground out. "By sundown today?" Jack suggested. Theseus sent a glare at the one, but he was stuck, and he knew it.
"By sundown today,"
he agreed blackly. "Good," Jack said. "Then I declare this case settled. Next!" He spent the rest of the morning handling more water cases, a few land disputes, and one involving crops that had migrated from one plot to another. Most of them were quickly and more or less easily handled. A couple of them took a little more thought, and one was tricky enough that he decided to postpone it to the next day. As the group in the Great Hall thinned, runners quietly left and rounded up the next batch of complainants. There didn't seem to be any particular pattern to the cases. Jack wasn't being given the oldest complaints first, or those involving the highest-ranking Golvans. Certainly they weren't dealing with the most urgently pressing. His only guess was that Sifi had put some of the easier ones up front so that she and the one could see whether their kidnapped Jupa actually knew what he was doing. Finally, thankfully, they broke for the midday meal.
"You're doing well,"
Dracos murmured from Jack's shoulder as the boy wandered along the edge of the great hall, munching on a stalk of something sweet and crunchy he'd snared from the buffet table Don Sifi's people had set up. Thanks, Jack murmured back, glancing down at his shoulder before he remembered that the Judge Paladin robe ran right up to his neck. I hope you'll still be saying that when they start throwing the tricky stuff at me.
Some of this morning's cases have been tricky enough,
Draco said.
You've had to deal not only with legal questions, but social and political ones as well.
Actually, I don't think I'm doing much legal work at all, Jack said. Mostly I'm just getting everyone to do what they should have done months or years ago on their own.
Perhaps you're not so much a judge as a mediator,
Dracos offered.
Your success here has been in bringing opposing sides together in a compromise.
What I'm doing is finding the right levers to use on them, Jack corrected. It's not a lot different from con work. Dracos was silent a moment.
Some of the techniques may be similar,
he said,
but the intent is far different. Under Uncle Virgil's direction, you used these methods to steal from people. Here you use them to bring justice and harmony.
Maybe, Jack said reluctantly. Dracos might be right, but he wasn't quite ready to agree that what he was doing was nearly so noble. It still felt way too much like what he'd been doing for Uncle Virgil all those years.
I am concerned, though, by the fact that apparently no other Judge Paladins have been here all this time,
Dracos went on.
You said they traveled in circuits through the less populated areas.
I also said there weren't enough of them, Jack reminded him. Actually, this whole planet probably qualifies as a less populated area. My guess is that any Judge Paladin who's touched down on Semaline has stuck to the cities and towns. I doubt most of them even know this canyon is out here.
I wonder how your parents found it.
I don't know, Jack said. Maybe we'll find out when we get a chance to go up to that mining area. I wonder if there are any cases that'll give us an excuse to do that.
You believe that's where your parents died?
Look around, Jack said, turning around and leaning his back against the wall. Well, no, I guess you can't. This seems to be where the Jupas judge, and there's no sign anywhere of any kind of explosion.
It has been 11 years,
Dracos reminded him.
They would surely have repaired any damage.
If they did a really good job of it, Jack said. Don't forget, I've had a pretty good look at the building. It's all the same type of stone, and all the stone shows the same wear pattern. The floor stones in particular fit perfectly together.
I'll accept your analysis,
Draco said, though Jack thought he could hear an unspoken, for now.
But that brings up another possibility. If they were visiting the mine, could the explosion that killed them have been an accident after all?
Jack chewed the inside of his cheek. That was a good point. Maybe there was no real mystery here, no hidden crime to be uncovered and avenged. We won't know until we get up there, he decided. Let's put our heads together and come up with some reason to go topside. Finishing off the sweet stock, he turned back toward his seat of judgment. In the meantime, I've got more justice to dispense. The afternoon's cases were pretty much a repeat of the morning's stack. Most of them involved water and crop problems, with a few apartment and neighbor troubles thrown in. Most of the cases struck Jack as rather feeble, with the appeal to a higher authority in each case probably having been made by whichever side had been the loser under the one's original decision. Close to half the canyon, he reflected, had probably been rather annoyed when a new Judge Paladin had actually shown up. It was on the last case of the day, as the sky was beginning to darken overhead, that the pattern suddenly changed.
This is 4-8, not 2,
Don Sifi said, as a slightly bedraggled Golvan was brought forward.
He was discovered this morning sleeping in the flying transport of the many.
Really? Jack said, noting the bruising along the right side of Foinatu's neck, where Dracos had knocked him out. Why didn't you simply sleep in your apartment, Fortinatu? The other didn't answer, his eyes focused on the floor in front of Jack's feet.
He claims to have been set upon by others,
Don Sifi said.
At least one, possibly more. He further claims that these others damaged the flying transport's interior.
I see, Jack said. Don Sifi's voice was steady and professional enough, but he could sense contempt lurking beneath the words. From some of the other neighbor conflict cases he'd heard that afternoon, he gathered that accusing someone of assault was a very serious charge among the Golvins. Doing so without proof was apparently even more so. Can you name these assailants? He asked.
I cannot,
Forinatu said, his voice low. Jack pursed his lips. Without proof of the assault, his logical legal course would be to assume Fortinatu was lying and come up with some punishment for sleeping in the shuttle and some compensation for damaging it. But on the other hand, maybe this was exactly the right time for a little creativity. Step forward, he ordered the Golvin. Fortinatu hesitated, then shifted a few steps closer. Jack leaned forward, peering closely at him. Did these assailants strike you or merely lock your arms? He asked.
They struck me.
Gingerly, Fortinatu touched his neck.
Here.
Yes, I see. Jack leaned back again in his chair. I'll make inquiries among the many, he said. You were released for the moment without punishment. Don Sifi turned to Jack, her skin wrinkling in surprise.
Jupa?
Clearly he's been hit, Jack said, pointing out the bruise. If he was assaulted and others did the damage to the transport, he cannot be held accountable.
No, of course not,
Don Sifi murmured.
Fortinatu, you may go. I thank the Jupa,
Fortinatu said, his face as wrinkled with surprise as Don Sifi's. But along with the surprise, Jack could see a hint of puzzlement as well. Small wonder. The Golvin had probably concluded that his attacker was Jack himself, or someone in league with him, and that his trial would thus be a complete sham. Except the Jupa had not only accepted his explanation, but had even let him off. He would, Jack suspected, be doing a lot of rethinking tonight.
That is the last case for the day,
Don Sifi said, closing down her notebook as Fortinatu headed for the door.
It has been an honor to serve with you, Jupa Jack. I look forward to doing so again tomorrow.
As do I, Jack said, standing up and stretching his shoulders. How badly was the flying transport damaged, by the way?
Not badly,
Don Sifi assured him.
Merely some torn cloth. It has been taken to the fabric maker's shop for repair.
Ah, Jack said. And as long as it was there, presumably, it wouldn't be available for Fortinatu to borrow again, which was good. Unfortunately, it also wouldn't be available for Jack and Dracos to borrow should the need arise. That wasn't so good. I trust it will be repaired soon, he added.
Sooner than we will find Fortinatu's assailants, I expect,
Don Sifi said, a hint of her earlier disapproval coloring her voice. I take it you don't think much of him? Jack suggested. Don Sifi's ears stretched out briefly. A shrug?
He is not one of the uprights,
she said.
Far from it. I will say no more.
I suppose every place has a few scoundrels, Jack said, a part of him noting the irony. A few months earlier, he would have qualified as one of the scoundrels himself. If they didn't, we wouldn't need Judge Paladins. Don Sifi bowed her head to him.
And we are most grateful for your service and wisdom.
You're welcome, Jack said, suppressing his automatic impulse to downplay his so-called wisdom. Speaking of service, how many cases did we serve today?
41,
Don Sifi said.
An excellent start.
How many cases are left? She consulted her notebook.
792.
Jack suppressed a groan. Great. I guess we won't be running out of work anytime soon then, he said as cheerfully as he could manage. Good night, Thonsifi. Good night, one among many, he added, looking at the one.
Good evening to you, Trooper Jack,
The one said gravely.
Your evening food is waiting in your apartment.
Thank you, Jack said. He suddenly realized, ravenously hungry, and he would bet that Draco's was even more so.
Sleep well and peacefully,
The one added.
I will see you tomorrow.